right, I'm going to get it going.
Sweet.
I want to make sure I don't go too long so you folks can get out of here a little early and hopefully avoid the traffic getting home. So, I'm going to have to stand over here a little bit to make sure I get the left side of the room too. So we're talking about safe and secure collaboration with Microsoft Purview today. So I think John and Brian gave me the title of the presentation before I actually had the presentation put together. So whenever you do something like this, for me, first thing I do is, dig into my topic, right? So when we think about collaboration, just in general, this is multiple people coming together, right? It's a web. It's a web of all sorts of people nowadays. People on your team, people not on your team, people in other organizations, partners, vendors, contractors, freelancers, some of which are authenticated and trusted, federated in our systems, some of which are not. There's a lot of collaboration that happens nowadays. Different locations. This has changed in the past couple of years, especially with the onset of the pandemic. However, when we think about secure, so this is the etymology of these words. I found this one hilarious. Without care or fear, dreading no evil, a sense that is now archaic when you look up secure. So when you think about secure collaboration, my first question is collaboration like this even possible nowadays in the systems and platforms that we use? I don't know about completely without care. In fact, I think taking more care is one of the things that we need in order to have more secure collaboration. But we'll see what we can do today by taking a look at the Microsoft Purview product. Before we get into that, though, I do want to overview the landscape. So I felt that, when it comes to remote work and hybrid work and the changes that we've all experienced in the past couple of years, we all feel it, right? We all know that it's here to stay and whatnot, but I like to put data behind these things as much as possible. So I'm going to hit you guys with a lot of data up front here to just confirm what we're already feeling and help speak to the reality of the situation around collaboration. So first is, right now, about 12.7% of the workforce is remote or hybrid, expected to shift to about 22% by 2025. 16% of businesses have no physical office. Total Solutions is in that category, so it does work. We have KC and Una back there from our company who have worked for us for a little while now, and this is my first time meeting them face-to-face today. Came in from Chicago for the event. So it can work. I know that there's a lot of folks that I've heard who says, oh, it can't work, well, it definitely can work. And there's a lot of businesses out there doing it, including our own. And evidence of this, too, is that something that's very important, bringing new people into the fold. Employers are conducting 93% of those interviews remotely right now as opposed to having people come in. So very, very common. And when you look at the data from Gallup here on overall the locations for people, you can see those two, the green and the purple, which are the remote versus hybrid, have kind of intersected a little bit. So you saw right when the pandemic hit, a lot of folks going exclusively remote. In the years since, we've kind of seen the mandates of returning to office at least some of the time come back into force. However, now we're seeing the rise of more of the hybrid workplace. Importantly, at the very bottom, which is the percent of folks that are working in the office, that's pretty stable right now, right? We're looking at about 20%. That hasn't really fluctuated much even since recent years, which the pandemic is over at this point in time. So it's here to stay. Part of the reason it's here to stay, and I know folks have alluded to this today, is because we love it. We absolutely love working remotely. This is data that they polled people who have remote capable jobs. They polled them in 2021, 2022, and 2023. So the green data is the 2021 poll. The purple data is the 2022, and the blue is the 2023. Folks are getting more and more entrenched in their desire to continue working remotely, continue working from home. If you add up all of the data from 2023, 93% of remote capable workers are extremely likely to look for jobs elsewhere if their company shuts this down on them. So that's a huge groundswell of really organic support from the people that do the work in all of our organizations that's really pushing us to have to deal with this for the long term. So what happened, we all kind of know this story. There's been an absolute takeover of cloud apps in order to deal with the hybrid and remote work challenge. So this is an average organization. Some of this data blew me away, actually. So the average organization, 500 to 2,000 users, stores data in 138 apps and uses about 1,500 distinct clouds each month for transactions and whatnot that those apps are executing. Just about everybody uses video conferencing. In fact, I think that when you're looking at the Teams room stuff, the drive to get people to come to the meeting room, you still have people that are taking calls from the same office. They're dialing in even though they're in the office together. You know, it's the same thing as working remotely. And then these last two data points I found are interesting, which is that 68% of organizations are using team collaboration platforms like Microsoft Teams. And you also, just about all of them are using those apps to communicate, have conversations with people outside the organization, so that web of collaborators that we talked about. And you can see just the data in this chart here. I put Teams and Slack and WebEx and Zoom on here. You can really see how the just off the charts growth, maybe not so much for Slack. I think I put that one on there just for a slight dig, right? But at the end of the day, really, really explosive growth in these technologies over the past couple years. And we're all still dealing with the fallout from that. Now, what's the downside of this is that we love working remotely, but we don't like having good cyber hygiene. And when I say we, I mean all of us. It's not our favorite thing to deal with. So as users, 20% of users store data in personal apps or personal instances. A personal instance would be, I have a personal Microsoft account that I log into, so I can authenticate more easily with Total Solutions Microsoft account. Personal app would be, you know, not related whatsoever to Microsoft. And of course, this fun one, the second bullet here, when people quit, they steal a bunch of information from the organization right before they go. All this data is as up to date as possible as I could find in 2023. So this is very, very recent statistics that we're looking at here. But it's not just the users. In IT, we've got our own skeletons in the closet. So 41% of us have more than one meeting app, and 38% of us have more than one team collaboration app. That makes it harder to stay secure. Different data in different locations. And 80% of us IT leaders see data sprawl as an urgent and critical problem. Microsoft tells us that 10% of user accounts in Active Directory are stale, meaning they haven't had their password changed or they haven't been logged onto in a while. So we've got this web of collaborators, we're authenticating guests into our environment, and then we forget about them. And they still have access, they're still in there, they can still touch our data, and it is a big security risk. So overall, it's not just IT, it's the business leaders as well. Executives know, they know that remote work and hybrid work has greater security risks than the world before. So what are we doing about it? We're also facing some pretty strong headwinds with regards to data loss and theft of data. So you can see the 2,716 data point there. That's an estimation. We're not through 2023 yet. We only have half the year so far. So we've seen half that number. We're at about 1,300 some odd breaches so far in the US this year. So if you just extrapolate that out for the second half of the year, you're going to hit about 2,700. From Q1 to Q2 alone, we saw the number of accounts impacted by breaches jump from 5.4 million to 49.8 million here in the US. Again, this is 2020, this is like very recently, an 830% increase in accounts impacted by breaches. And a lot of these breaches involve, they're not coming for your cat photos, right? They're coming for the sensitive data. They want the information that ultimately they can use to leverage against you or for some other profitable purpose. Alongside of this, though, it's not just the external threats. Yes, we have to worry about a lot of different external threats to the organization. I think IT folks are pretty well versed in a lot of those threat detection prevention capabilities. Typically, we have pretty secure boundaries around the organization. We spent a lot of time on that over the years. The insider threats are on the rise. So big increase in the number of cybersecurity incidents that are insider-led. We're seeing, as you can see the breakdown here, a huge percentage of these are just negligent users, right? This is like forgetting that somebody had access, failing to clean it up, and then later they get in. It's not somebody intentionally trying to steal information, it's information just getting lost, right? The passive voice, it was lost, right? It's us acting with negligence, not having good cyber hygiene that essentially causes this. And we're seeing the amount of time that it takes to manage insider incidents go up. So it used to be about 77 days last year, now it's up to 85 days. The amount of money is extensive to clean up these sorts of incidents as well. So when I was looking at this, some of the research that I uncovered was a study of about 400 organizations that broke down successful versus non-successful organizations. So this wasn't just with security, this was organizations that were considered successful with their cloud spend, collaboration spend broadly. And so in the study of 400 companies, they said if the organization can actually measure improved revenue, cost reduction, or productivity based on their cloud spend, we're going to consider them a successful company. And what they found is that successful companies were 20% more likely to be investing in collaboration security than non-successful companies. And there were 5 common strategies that they employed. And these are those strategies right there. So use a security platform. Microsoft Purview is a great example of that. Number 2, one that I think is really difficult for our security stakeholders to get on board with, but one that is critically important, is that the collaboration teams themselves are taking more ownership, more management responsibility with regards to daily security operations. You're the owner of a team. You are participating in security operations by who you let into that team, who you add to that team, how you educate the members of your team if there's sensitive data that you're dealing with on that team site, for example, or that team's channel. They definitely focus on the point of the guest users. So federated and gateway capabilities, so where people are coming and getting access outside the organization, that's a big focal point for where they're trying to shore up security habits. Toll fraud has been and still remains a big cost, so there is a focus on that as well. I'm not going to touch too much on that one. That's just one that's there. But then, of course, last but not least, they're really focusing on zero trust principles and adding that to the secure access edge. So, and when you think about zero trust, they don't trust anybody. You know, we don't trust anybody. We don't trust our own users at the end of the day. That's the notion of zero trust, right? So especially collaboration partners, folks that are coming in, we really want to make sure that we're re-verifying who they are, that they actually need access to the data, and that we can trust them. So how are we going to address this? Well, it's in the title with Microsoft Purview, right? So what I want to spend most of our time doing here in this section is talking about how we can implement features and functions of Microsoft Purview so we can understand them. Quick show of hands, how many of us are on E3 licensing? Okay. How about E5 licensing? All right. And then anybody that's small business, like Business Premium, okay? Anybody that's on the Business Basic? Okay, so Business Basic is the one that I have no valuable information, so I'm glad that nobody's on that one right now. The other 3 license sets, so what you can do in this space is definitely dependent on what your licensing level is. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of if you're on the Business Premium or an E3, what's kind of that baseline set of features that you need to understand, have competency in. I know we're going to have various pockets of competency with those features. Hopefully there's some new information, at least some recommendations that we see as the baseline for using those. We'll walk through some examples. And then we're also going to take a little bit look at some of the advanced features that you would see in the E5 license set. So some of the new capabilities. And just I'll jump to the punchline really quickly. This is the new thing. Has anybody heard about this yet? The adaptive protection? This is brand new? Okay, cool, because this is brand new for me too. And this is my first time ever trying to demo about it. And the demo does not work perfectly, so I'm not going to, this is my own broccoli moment in terms of getting my image to work up here. So I can show you the features. I'm going to get this demo to work and work the way I want it to. I don't have it fully functioning today, but you can at least walk through the intent and see how this is intended to work behind the scenes. And I think, as with a lot of things, I haven't given it enough time to propagate the settings and fully capture all the information. So we'll look at this adaptive protection because it's a really cool set of features that the higher level license folks have. But first, before we jump into those demos, why use Purview? Number one reason, visibility into the data. So there's a lot of ability to see what's out there. If you don't know what you got, you can't protect it. There are a lot of tools to empower teams to take more of that control that we talked about. So giving not just our collaboration team owners, but also business stakeholders. So the legal department, folks in compliance are huge stakeholders in this area. Our experience has been it is very difficult to get hard and fast requirements from those sorts of stakeholders, right? So they live in an abstract world. The regulations don't say implement X in Microsoft Purview. You know, they say implement encryption end-to-end for data at rest and data in transit. Great. How do I implement that in Microsoft Purview? So there's a lot of tools that can help those stakeholders bridge that gap between the regulatory environment that they live in, and the technical reality that we live in. And I want to show a little bit of that today as well. And then, of course, managing sensitive data with zero trust. That's going to be the point that we really, really hit on in terms of information protection, looking at some of those settings, understanding what they do so we can explain them to stakeholders and possibly implement them or improve our implementations. And then streamlined risk management, regulatory compliance. I already talked about that a little bit. But of course, empower the organization to protect and secure in new ways, and that's a little bit of that adaptive protection stuff that I want to look at today. So first demo that we're going to jump into is more for the business premium E3 baseline. This is kind of like the journey that Microsoft puts out there. I love using this. I think this is a great example of how these feature sets are all interconnected and work together in terms of data classification, data protection, information protection, data loss prevention, and then records management or data lifecycle management. Data lifecycle management is one that I do not have much content on today. That's something that we can follow up on if you're interested to learn more about it. Really today I'm focusing on the first 3 bullets, which is understanding the data, looking at how we protect the data, and then preventing data loss. So we're going to start here with our baseline. Let me get my demo pulled up here, and we'll jump right in. So I am signed in as the administrator account on this demo tenant, and we're going to go to the compliance center here. Oh, classic. What's going on here? Oh, I dropped off the internet.
Submit a ticket.
Submit a ticket to Microsoft. Where's Dave when I need him? All right. Hopefully this should load for me now. Beautiful. So in the Security and Compliance Center, when we look at the left blade here, there's a lot of little admin areas that we can get to. First place I want to focus is on the compliance. First place I want to focus here is information protection. So if you have an E3 or business premium licensing, one of the things that you are able to do is to create and manage sensitivity labels for the organization. So sensitivity labels are like stamping a document, right? You can think about how government confidentiality works at in the DOD and stuff, right? Like that, where it used to be, you stamp it as top secret, it's in a bunch of folders, right? And when you see that this is top secret, you're probably not supposed to read it unless you have clearance. That's like the notion here, except we're not just stamping it with a label that says it's top secret. We can also add additional protections to it that help us prevent that data from actually being viewed by the wrong parties. So right here, though, when we look at these 5 categories, these are what I would recommend as the 5 baseline categories for sensitivity labeling. These can apply to just about any organization out there. You can get more creative with these. You can get more nuanced than this. But at the baseline level, and we'll go look at these really quickly because the descriptions that we provide on these to our user community is extremely important. So first category, and I find that a lot of organizations that implement it, they don't actually have a personal or non-business category of sensitivity. We do personal stuff on our business accounts all the time, right? Send a little personal email maybe, have a photo that we download, that sort of stuff. This is for that category of stuff. We're not doing any sort of encryption or any sort of protection of this information. We're just making sure that we don't treat it like business data. Next category is going to be public data. So this is data that is already out there, distributed to the public. It can be found out there on the internet, essentially. And so we don't do any special protections around public data either. Marketing content's a good example of that. Press releases, job posting, those sorts of things. General is interesting. I've seen a lot of times where general is labeled as confidential, because this is where we're starting to talk about internal data. This is data that is not intended for public consumption, internal to the organization. It flows pretty freely throughout the organization, so people are sharing this with one another all the time. They're sharing it with external parties pretty often. I like calling that general instead of confidential because we don't really treat it as confidential. We kind of treat it as the stuff that we deal in day to day. And then our 4th category being confidential. So confidential is intended for specific audiences. This is information that we want to protect and offer encryption protocols around. And then the last category being, I've called it top secret. Folks have different names for this sort of thing. This would be your regulated data. So if you have data that's subject to strict compliance regulations, HIPAA, GDPR, FDIC, 23 NYCC Part 500, NIST 800 171, blah, 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 blah. There's like a billion. I would also point out in the trends right now that the regulatory environment, the regulators know about all this data loss. And so you're seeing tighter and tighter controls around data regulation getting put on the organization as well. So that's kind of another trend that we see that's telling us that we need to pay attention to this stuff. And so I'm going to focus on the confidential and top secret ones really quickly, and we're going to look at how we configure these sensitivity labels. So first thing we do, we've got a name, we go to scope, we're having this applied to files and emails. Note that down here, you can apply this to group sites as well as to data assets and meetings. We're not doing that here, and so we have chosen in this example to apply or remove encryption as well as to apply content markings. So when you go to apply encryption to these things, this is a really cool feature that's actually kind of tricky to get working without some blockers to the end users. So rather than letting users decide to set permissions, we're going to go ahead and apply permissions now. And we have applied these permissions in two areas. So the first one is to all users. So anybody that's got the that's within our tenant, and that is a user within our tenant, kind of an internal user. And then next, authenticated users. So this is add any authenticated users here. So I want to just touch on one really specific thing right here, which is the choosing permissions. So you can see here for authenticated users, I've chosen the reviewer permissions. In the recommendation, I would probably not have this be the case. This is kind of a case-by-case instance per organization. But you can see here when I go to choose the permissions, I have all sorts of levels that I can do. Just viewer. A lot of times, if you don't want that, if you don't want this information, this confidential information to be you send it to somebody external who's authenticated in, and you don't want them to send it to another person, you want to offer more restrictive permissions so that they can't forward it. So I'm going to show you when we look at the actual example of this, how that plays out. So we could say, for example, custom permissions, just view content, and all they would be able to do would be to view the content. And this sort of stuff also has really, really cool features around screen capture, where if you apply really restrictive permissions, you actually can't even take a screenshot of this information. You can't screen print it. You can't share it on a conference. It blacks it out so that you can't leak data out that way as well. So kind of a cool feature. Now, let's see. Cancel out of that. Encryption. Now we look at content markings. I've applied content markings on all of these sensitivity labels just so we know what level of document we're working with. We can have watermarks, headers and footers, customizing what the text is, where it's how large it is, those sorts of things. That's again literally the stamp on the document, so users should be able to know, okay, this is something that is more or less sensitive. And then of course auto labeling. Auto labeling is going to be a feature that is with that higher level license set. So if you're in the E3, your business premium, you're not going to be using auto labeling. That's okay. I think that, again, for us, we have E5s. We do not use auto labeling. We are in the business of getting folks in our organization to, when they have to send an email or create a document, we want them to intentionally categorize it. We just haven't got that far in our implementation yet. So it's totally fine to not do auto labeling. However, when you do auto labeling, it does make the user experience a little bit easier. So think, I add a file to a team. That team has been tagged at a certain sensitivity level. That file will automatically be labeled with that level of sensitivity. If you have a sensitive project, for example, it'll automatically be labeled at that level so users don't have to think about the labels that they apply to documents. Applying protection to groups and sites. Data assets, I don't have any of that stuff here. So let's look at this really quickly. Let's jump into SharePoint. And we are going to go to the leadership team. And we are going to look at my sensitive data demo here. And I've got several documents queued up here that are at the various sensitivity levels. So let's just open one in the desktop application. Could have done that with one click instead of two, but old habits die hard sometimes. And where you'll see this showing up in the apps is in this sensitivity label button right up here. So if you're using that basic manual labeling function, users go right here and they are able to select the level of sensitivity for the document. When we publish these labels, which going quickly back to the admin pane, over here. Actually, we'll go over here and do it. Label policies, where we publish these labels out. This is where when I publish a label policy, I'm able to choose which labels I want to publish. So I've got my list here, who I want to publish them to. So if you're a large organization with multiple business units, you can have BU number 1 have a different set of labels than BU number 2. If they have specific data requirements or data protection requirements that is driven by CISO number 1 and CISO number 2 don't do it the same way, which definitely happens. So you can kind of account for that there. I believe you do need an E5 in order to configure admin units. So again, just a lot of little differences in the features functions here that we can be specific about. And when we get to settings here, this is where require users to apply a label to their document. So if I just create a new document here, before I can even, oh, that's not working on me. This is where you can require, in order to actually even save the document or edit the document, you can require that a user actually apply a label. The reason I like this feature function is that when we're looking at going from nothing to something in terms of information protection, this brings assets up to speed as users interact with legacy data. So if before someone can edit a document, they have to tag a label. So the most active information gets tagged and protected first in line. And if something hasn't been used for a while, it won't get tagged, but it's likely less of a concern if it's not actually being used by anybody. And if they're going to do anything with it, send it somewhere, share it, they're going to have to provide that label. So that's a key setting there that we like to turn on, especially when we're doing the manual labeling. I also like to, personally, again, there's different views on this, I like to not apply a default label. If we were applying a default label here, it would probably be general, right? We talked about how most of the information in our organization is general information. If we default apply the general label to everything, what's going to happen? No one's ever going to change it, right? So this, again, it might be a small step in terms of user inconvenience, but we actually force them to pick what the level of sensitivity is. And then we can, of course, can choose a whole bunch of similar settings with regards to the various areas where this label can apply. So I want to do a quick demo. One more area that we want to look at here, which is how information protection relates to the end goal, which is data loss prevention. So everybody's tagging their, we've got these manual labels implemented, people are tagging stuff. Great. How is that actually protecting us? Yes, we've got some things that are encrypted, but we want to go one step further, which is where we want to go to data loss prevention. We want to create a data loss prevention policy around our sensitive information. So that's what this is here. I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on DLP because this can be a pretty complex set of settings to get right and configure, but I do want to show a couple things. So we'll just breeze past these. We're applying this DLP to email, SharePoint sites, and OneDrive. The advanced DLP rules is where I want to look here. So this is where we actually customize the rules of data loss prevention. So what I've done here is I've created 2 DLP rules that are more or less the same. So when content contains a sensitivity label of top secret and that content is shared with someone inside the organization, I want to alert the administrator. We're not blocking anything. We're paying attention to that for now. You could also have the option of blocking them but letting them override the alert. That's another popular setting. And then the other one here, which is top secret info shared externally, so information contains top secret, content shared with people outside my organization. This is where we're actually going to restrict access to the content for external users. So how does this work in reality? Let's take a look and see how it works in, oops, I don't want Word, I want Outlook. So we go to Outlook here, and I'm going to send a new email to, and remember this is the DLP is scoped to mail and SharePoint, so it should be scoped to my Exchange account, and we have these labels applied to emails as well as documents. So I'm going to send this to mattfleszar@gmail.com, and let's start at the top with check, whoa, can't type, out this top secret stuff, text. And so I go to send it. This is where every time I try to do anything as an end user, I'm going to be prompted to label it. So I say, it's top secret. I send it. We wait for a second. We wait for a second, and there it is. My message has been blocked. It won't let me send it to an external user, right? So the DLP rule here is preventing me from sending this information to an external user. Let's do a similar test, but rather than using top secret, we're going to pretend that I am smart and I'm malicious. And so I'm saying, all right, how about if I say, look at this confidential stuff. And I'm still going to send it to mattfleszar@gmail.com. And we're going to label this as confidential. So I didn't have any DLP rules set up around confidential information. System's not going to watch for this. It's not going to block it from happening. So in my Gmail account, I should receive this message. Let's see here. This is my fun Gmail account with 18,186 unread messages. Yeah, I don't use it a heck of a lot, right? So I certainly shouldn't be sending any confidential stuff to it, but there we go, it shows up, right? So look at this confidentiality stuff, can't spell, read the message. So we note here this message is protected by Purview message encryption. When we configure the label, the information protection sensitivity label, we applied encryption to confidential stuff and top secret stuff. So although the DLP policy isn't catching this and blocking me, and maybe this is where you start to balance the user experience versus security, we're having overlapping controls here. So in order to read the message, it's going to require that I authenticate. Okay? So we'll give this just a minute to load, but it's essentially going to say sign in with a one-time passcode, which is a form of authentication. It's going to email my Gmail with a one-time passcode, and hopefully it will show up because, there it is. It showed up quickly. So I can get this one-time passcode, copy it, paste it in here, continue, and now I can read the email. You can see I've got the headers, my confidential headers here. I can see the text of the email. Note, though, I still have the ability to reply all and forward this communication. So remember what I was talking about when I added authenticated users as one of the scope parties for this. I had the setting that they were a reviewer as opposed to changing it to just a viewer or even more restrictive permissions. So that's where I could change the permissions of authenticated users, and I could prevent Matt Fleszar, although maybe Matt Fleszar is trusted, I could prevent this from getting sent to anybody else. It'd be basically a do not forward on this piece of sensitive information, which is likely the way we would want to treat confidential information, certainly top secret. So that's kind of like a little bit of an overview of, for me, some of the basic protections. Again, this is when we look one more quick thing at the admin settings when we're configuring our DLP policies. So let's go into compliance. We'll go to DLP, data loss prevention. We're actually going to look at this policy really, really quickly. So we'll pull up the editing of it. Come on. We're so used to instantaneous, right?
It only seems long when you're demoing it.
I know, right?
So
I want to jump in really quickly to the actual settings when you're configuring a rule, because this looks pretty intimidating in terms of filling this all out, but it's not that complex, right? So I say, and I'm just going to do a new rule here. So create a new rule. We're going to say test rule, add a condition, content contains. This is where I add sensitivity label. Notice I also have sensitive info types, which we're going to get into in a second. But I have sensitivity label. I get to pick my sensitivity label as top secret. Add. I can add a condition that the content is shared from Microsoft 365 with people outside my organization. Add an action, restrict access or block only people outside. This is where the user will get that email saying, hey, your action was blocked by our DLP rules. We can customize policy tips to help give them more information on how to avoid running afoul of our DLP rules. This is where we can allow overrides from M365 services, require a business justification that I have to type in order to override the rule, all sorts of fun things. And these sorts of settings get increasingly important when we start to look at these new adaptive protection features. So I know I'm running short on time, and I'm not going to have I'm not going to be able to give quite as much of a full demo on some of the E5 stuff as I want. If I am frequently overriding the DLP rule and providing a business justification to send top secret information, that's probably an indicator that I am at an elevated risk of leaking information outside the organization. And so when we look at those more complex settings that you can do on an E5 with some of the adaptive protection, what we're seeing now is the ability to take this DLP rule and apply it selectively based on whether the user falls in an elevated, moderate, or a low risk category based on their behavior within the environment over the past 7 days, 30 days. We can choose those sorts of settings. So that's some of the real cool power that we see here. So typically, these settings are either too restrictive or not restrictive enough. It's almost impossible to thread the needle exactly on DLP settings, right? We provide too many roadblocks for people to work productively, and so they're always having to override stuff. We get lost with inundated with alerts, and we're ignoring them because every single one of our alerts is a false positive. Or we loosen it up a little bit, and then we actually miss sensitive information that's being lost in the organization. So some of these settings here can be very, very important for that. But let's jump really quickly into a more complex scenario here. This is a different demo tenant where we're cooking with an E5 license, and we're going to look at some other fun settings here. So this demo is around a story, a use case of Contoso, who owns the tenant. Right? We love the Contoso, right? Microsoft. Like I think there's a patent on Contoso or something at Microsoft for sure.
It is a registered name globally, so that we can use it anywhere. So Contoso does a lot of stuff these days.
Contoso does a lot of stuff. So anyway, the idea here, Contoso is merging with Prosware and employees. There's a lot of people working on this merger. It's really exciting, but there's a lot of sensitive information flowing and needing to flow related to the Prosware merger. And so that's what we're going to be keying in on for some of our examples here when we look at what we can do in an E5. So we're back in the compliance pane, and the first place that I want to draw your attention here is data classification. So you do have this capability in E3. It's a little bit more limited in terms of what you can see versus an E5, but this is where you can really dig into just getting a sense of what your information looks like on the whole across your organization. And so when I look at classifiers here, sensitive info types, I can create a sensitive info type, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want to actually create a sensitive info type for this Prosware merger, and just for the sake of time, I already have one created. So you can see here, we created a custom info type related to the Prosware merger, a custom SIT. There's 316 built-in SITs, as you saw before. Those are things like US credit card numbers or personal health information or all these things that we can identify algorithmically within the system. And so when we look at the Prosware merger, we created this custom info type, and we have some patterns that we're looking for here. So if I go edit this pattern, you can see that we are looking for a primary, is this not going to show it here? Yeah, here we go. A keyword list of, we're looking for the word Prosware merger showing up in the text of documents, emails, Excel files. I believe in this one we also have, we can identify like specific documents. There's supporting elements that you can add to make sure that it's more narrow. So there's a lot of different, you can do regular expressions, functions, a lot of different ways to hone in on like this specific thing that we want to protect and have a sensitive information type around. So we create a special sensitive info type for the Prosware project. Now when we go look at our information protection labels, and this is one where it's very similar to what we showed before, right? So this is a Microsoft out-of-the-box demo. 5 categories, personal, public, general. They've gone with confidential and highly confidential. It's the same principles. I will note here that there's some nesting and some more intelligence around, if it is confidential, is it confidential and meant to be shared with anyone? All employees, just trusted people. So again, you can go just a little layer deeper in terms of the level of classification that you're doing. But you see we also have this Prosware merger sensitivity label that we're working with here. So very similar to what we've gone through before, where we're configuring a sensitivity label, applying encryption, applying content markings, those sorts of fun things, and having a sensitivity label around that. So we get into, after that, a DLP policy. And we have a specific DLP policy created for the Purview merger. So this is very similar to what we looked at previously with the rules and the configurations around watching for sensitive info types that include the Purview merger. And one thing that I want to call your attention to here, when we look at the advanced DLP rules, is that this one has specifically 3 different rules associated with 3 different user risk levels. And so when we go to actually look at the configuration of the specific rule, you know how we can add our conditions up here, the content's in Microsoft 365, it contains the certain data points that we want. We can also add a condition that the user is at a certain adaptive protection level, so low, medium, high. And so this is where it's going to use that machine learning and heuristic information to look at users, and if a user falls into a minor risk category, it's going to apply Rule 1. If they fall into a moderate risk category, apply Rule 2, and an elevated risk category, they're going to apply Rule 3. And so much more nuanced in terms of, and I think just again, I put this in here for the interests of time, in terms of a visual around this, this is kind of how you would think about it, right? User 1, maybe they download a bunch of confidential files. Now they're in the low category. We're going to apply a DLP rule to them, and it's not going to be super restrictive, but maybe we'll require that they provide a business justification if they're going to be downloading those files in the future. Now they start actually downgrading the sensitivity from confidential to general and providing a business justification. Okay, now they're in the moderate category, and then we can see that they've actually copied stuff to a USB, printed it, sent it externally. Now we're putting them in the elevated file. So a user that falls in category 1, we might allow them to share this confidential information inside of the organization seamlessly, whereas a user that's in the highest category, we might block it immediately, just not let them do it whatsoever because we're concerned about their behavior. So really a lot more nuance in terms of how we operate with those rules. These features and settings are in preview, right? So again, this is early days of this stuff. This again, like I said, first time that I've actually tried to get a demo tenant working with some of these features. We have not implemented that for a client yet, right? This is all innovative stuff that we're figuring out and making sure we can implement. But this is all found in the insider risk management area. So insider risk management broadly is going to be a feature set at the E5, not at the E3. But insider risk management is generally allowing us to watch for risky behaviors by certain users. And you can see here I've got certain high activities that are flagged by individuals that have been doing. So there's a bunch of, I have a list of like 9 users here that are set up with Power Automate flows to go do behaviors that are risky and hopefully flag the system over time, right? So that's what you're seeing here is those behaviors kind of flowing into our demo. But these are just the alerts themselves. So if we go look at the alerts, we can dig into these, check one out. This one's a low. We can create a case directly from this, so confirm all alerts and create a case, manage it as a case within the system, and do our cleanup or remediations if necessary. But also in insider risk management, we do have I just want to show this one quick setting. We do have the ability to anonymize this. So if we're talking, I just have it on, I'm not using anonymized names, so because I was trying to figure out all weekend which users were triggering this stuff and why I couldn't get the darn adaptive protection settings to work. I wasn't quite there, so I switched this off, but generally you'd keep this on anonymized so that IT personnel aren't seeing personal identifying information and therefore breaching regulatory compliance rules. So this comes into compliance factors and considerations as well. If we go back to insider risk management, the magic trick here, so to speak, is this adaptive protection pane. You can see that I don't have, this is what I was hoping to get working for the demo today, was of these 9 users, I should have 3 of them in the elevated risk category, 3 of them in the moderate risk category, and 3 of them in the minor risk category. Again, I think if you check back with me in 2 days, they might actually be showing up there. Maybe we'll do a webinar or something like that to show this out to the world when we actually get it functioning. But again, that's the idea, is I can then go, based on those users, assign specific risk levels. I can, based on those, which risk level a user falls into, We can apply different DLPs, and this is where you actually edit what happens for, what gets somebody into the elevated category, right? So you can see here, the activity is that somebody is sharing a file with somebody outside the organization, and they do it, I have very, very low windows and whatnot, like if they do it once a day, bam, they're trying to get flagged. Right? So this, in theory, this should be working right now, obviously. Same thing for a moderate risk level. Here we have that somebody's deleting SharePoint files, and these are, again, a list of potential indicators that we can work with. We can look for specific sequences, a lot of different things that can get us, get us more intelligence in terms of how we apply these rules out to the organization. And then minor is that we are looking at, they're just accessing the sensitive stuff. So you can be pretty basic with some of these. I think accessing sensitive information, changing, downgrading sensitivity, overriding rules and providing justifications. Those are going to be like the 3 core things that are pretty obvious examples of suspicious behavior, perhaps not prohibited behavior. And now with this adaptive protection, we've got some of those tools in here to be able to actually, based on how frequently it happens, be more nuanced with our data loss response to it. Okay, I think I'm running up on my time here, and I think that's about all I wanted to show today. When we share out I do have a couple important resources here that I want to make sure we get shared out when we share these presentations out. So the first one, the M365 guide, the service descriptions for security and compliance. This will give you that very specific details around what is included at which license level for all of those various services, insider risk management, DLP, information protection, et cetera, et cetera. At the very bottom here, I have the adaptive protection, help dynamically mitigate risks with adaptive protection. And then in the middle here, these 3 are a little bit more towards an E5, but these would be specifically that scenario that we didn't cover today, where you don't want to do manual. You don't want to jump all the way into trying to configure adaptive protection, but you want to configure sensitivity labeling with more auto labeling based on teams that are either sensitive or highly sensitive teams. So again, looking at that collaboration team level and applying more specific labeling and also DLP and sensitivity rules related to those situations. And there's a lot of good guidance in these about how to actually go about and do that from Microsoft. This one, fun read over here from McKinsey, just on the future of this stuff. And the future is more heuristics, more behavioral indicators, and machine learning behind this so that we can balance the usability of the system and have it be productive while actually providing more security and hopefully providing that, what did we say up here, that experience of having users operate with no fear, dreading no evil, unless they're trying to steal our stuff, right? Maliciously or unintentionally. So that's all I've got for today. You guys are welcome to email me, call me. I am happy to consult with any of you about any of this stuff. Take a look at what you've got cooking. Either talk about what it looks like to implement this or improve your current implementation. And thanks for coming and listening today.